January 17, 1945. The forest lay under a brittle winter sky. Snow clung to skeletal trees, muffling the footsteps of German sentries. Silence dominated the air, heavy with frost and anticipation. Soldiers huddled in foxholes and shallow trenches, cigarette smoke curling in the cold, their breath visible in short, anxious puffs. The tension was almost tangible, an uneasy calm before the storm. Then suddenly the night erupted. Trails of fire arced through the dark canopy as American rockets ignited above, their bright streaks slicing through the shadows. Trees splintered under the force, sending shards of bark and branches tumbling onto frozen ground. Shouts of alarm cut through the roar. German troops scrambling to mount a defense, their nerves fraying with every metallic scream of the rockets. The forest became a maze of chaos. Smoke and fire danced across the undergrowth. A distant artillery crash shook the ground, momentarily silencing the cries of men as both sides realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. For the German commanders, the attack was impossible, unimaginable, until the forest itself seemed to burn with the fury of an unexpected assault. In that moment, the balance of power in this quiet corner of Europe began to tilt. The Americans were not just attacking, they were reshaping the battlefield entirely. By late 1944, the tide of war in Europe had shifted decisively. The Allies had stormed Normandy in June, breaking through the Atlantic Wall, and were now advancing eastward with relentless pressure. The German High Command, battered by months of retreats and crippling losses, struggled to maintain cohesive lines across a sprawling front. Supplies were scarce, morale even scarcer, and the winter months promised a brutal test of endurance. In the Ardennes and surrounding forests of Western Europe, German positions were strategically placed to slow the Allied advance. These dense woods offered natural protection, concealing trenches, bunkers, and defensive positions that could transform a simple forest into a deadly maze for any intruding force. German commanders relied on the belief that the rough terrain would shield them, that any large-scale attack would be easily detected in advance. Patrols moved cautiously along snow-covered paths, rifles at the ready, while observation posts scanned for signs of movement. Across the lines, American planners had been preparing meticulously for months. Intelligence reports, often pieced together from intercepted communications and aerial reconnaissance, indicated weak points in the German defensive setup. Engineers and artillery units studied the forest terrain, identifying choke points and natural corridors. The plan was audacious: a sudden, concentrated assault using rockets and artillery to disorient German forces before ground troops moved in to exploit the chaos. The Americans understood one key truth: in a forest, this dense surprise would be their greatest weapon. By mid-January, both sides were aware of the stakes. The Germans had bolstered their positions with extra machine gun nests, camouflaged bunkers, and strategically placed barbed wire, believing these precautions sufficient to repel any frontal attack. They were unaware, however, that the Americans had developed a method to use rockets not just as artillery, but as psychological warfare, incendiary and explosive rounds designed to instill panic in tightly packed defensive formations. For German soldiers trained to expect artillery barrages but not a sudden sky-lit inferno of rockets, the coming assault would feel unreal. Leadership on both sides reflected contrasting mindsets. German commanders operated under strict orders to hold the forest at all costs, often ignoring the tactical situation in favor of ideological imperatives. Troops were drilled to fight defensively, to maintain positions even under fire, with strict reporting structures limiting autonomous action. On the American side, flexibility was emphasized. Unit leaders had been given latitude to exploit opportunities the moment confusion spread. Coordination between infantry, rocket artillery, and engineers was designed to be seamless, each movement amplifying the other. The forest itself became a character in this unfolding drama. Snow-laden branches could hide or reveal approaching forces. Narrow trails channeled movement, and frozen streams served as both obstacles and opportunities. The Germans believed the terrain worked in their favor, that any attack would be slow and detectable. American reconnaissance had mapped these assumptions meticulously, identifying the points where surprise could be leveraged to maximum effect. As January 17th approached, tension mounted. German troops rotated in and out of trenches, their breaths visible against the icy morning. They spoke in hushed tones of fatigue, rumors of Allied movements, and the relentless cold. Commanders reviewed maps and sent out patrols, but the vast, dark forest limited visibility. Across the lines, American forces assembled silently, every rocket, artillery shell, and infantry movement timed to precision. The plan required absolute coordination. Failure would mean catastrophic losses. What neither side could predict with certainty was the human element, the raw fear that sudden, overwhelming force would generate. Soldiers on the ground, regardless of training, were susceptible to shock, confusion, and instinctive reactions. The Americans counted on this. The Germans, confident in their positions, underestimated how rapidly a well-coordinated assault could unravel even the most disciplined formations. By nightfall, the forest seemed calm, almost deceptively quiet. But beneath the snow, behind camouflaged lines and in the shadow of skeletal trees, a storm was assembling. Soldiers checked rifles, adjusted helmets, and whispered prayers. Commanders on both sides sensed the approaching crescendo, though each imagined it differently, one anticipating a manageable skirmish, the other preparing for a surgical strike that would shatter the enemy before they could respond. And then, as darkness deepened, the first sparks of fire would arc across the forest canopy. The silence would shatter. The forest was an expanse of twisted oaks and pines, their bare branches scraping the gray sky. Snow blanketed the uneven terrain, hiding roots, rocks, and fallen logs that could easily trip an advancing soldier. Trails carved by previous patrols wove through the trees, narrow and treacherous, forcing troops into predictable paths. For German commanders, this seemed an advantage, a natural funnel to concentrate defensive fire. Yet the Americans had studied every inch of these woods. They knew the choke points, the high ground, and the areas where rockets and artillery would produce maximum disruption. German confidence was bolstered by years of experience fighting on the Eastern Front and in Normandy. Commanders assumed that the Americans, though skilled, would hesitate to strike in such difficult terrain. They anticipated sporadic harassment, artillery shells landing at intervals, but nothing that could penetrate deeply into their defensive positions. The forest, they believed, was a shield. They had not reckoned with innovation, the combination of concentrated rocket barrages and highly coordinated infantry assaults. The Americans, in contrast, approached the forest like a living map. Engineers had constructed makeshift observation posts to chart enemy positions, while reconnaissance patrols tested German lines for weak spots. Rocket batteries were positioned with precision, hidden in folds of terrain, their firing angles calculated to maximize both physical destruction and psychological impact. Commanders understood that shock and awe could be as deadly as bullets. They relied on surprise, using the forest's cover to conceal movement until the final moment. Within German ranks, the soldiers' routines betrayed a false sense of security. Trench rotations, ration distribution, and guard shifts continued with mechanical precision, almost oblivious to the invisible clock counting down to the American strike. Officers reviewed maps and noted American troop movements elsewhere, but they underestimated the speed with which the attack could arrive. Intelligence had provided fragments, reports of small units probing their defenses, but these were dismissed as minor skirmishes. There was no warning of the concentrated rocket assault that would soon ignite the treetops. Weather added another layer of complexity. A biting wind swept through the forest, carrying the scent of pine, smoke from distant artillery, and the faint metallic tang of impending violence. Snowdrifts muffled footfalls, giving the Americans an edge in stealth but also limiting visibility. For the Germans, the winter conditions reinforced overconfidence. Cold, fatigue, and routine had dulled alertness. Their positions, though fortified, were static. They were trained to react to predictable attacks, not the sudden, blinding chaos that would descend upon them. American planners exploited this perfectly. Rockets, with their dual role as incendiary devices and loud psychological weapons, were positioned to hit multiple sectors simultaneously. Infantry units would follow immediately, exploiting the panic sown by the explosions. Engineers had prepared trails for rapid movement, bridging frozen streams and clearing undergrowth where necessary. Every element was synchronized. The Germans, in contrast, relied on rigid hierarchies. Orders had to travel up and down the chain of command, slowing any response to sudden threats. Even among German commanders, there was disagreement about priorities. Some argued for aggressive reconnaissance, others for strict defensive discipline. Neither faction considered the possibility of an overwhelming, multi-pronged assault arriving under the cover of darkness, with fire raining from the trees themselves. The Americans counted on this blind spot, the assumption that the forest could only be attacked in conventional ways. By late afternoon, as shadows lengthened across the snow, the stage was set. German soldiers huddled in foxholes, adjusting rifles and sweeping their sectors with trained eyes. Commanders moved along the lines, confident that their positions were secure. In the surrounding darkness, American units waited in concealed positions. Rockets primed, artillery locked onto firing solutions, and infantry poised to exploit every opening. The forest, once a place of perceived safety, was about to become a crucible. When the first rockets erupted into the canopy, German assumptions would shatter. The quiet frozen expanse would transform into a landscape of fire, smoke and chaos testing every soldier, officer, and tactic in ways no map could predict. The soldiers in the forest were ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. For the German troops trained for defensive warfare, the first rocket salvo was a shock that cut through every expectation. Faces froze mid-motion, eyes widening as streaks of fire carved through the treetops. Shouts of alarm echoed across the snow, but discipline fractured under the sudden chaos. Men stumbled over roots and fallen branches, rifles clattering as panic spread like wildfire. Some froze entirely, caught between instinctive flight and drilled obedience. On the American side, soldiers waited for this exact moment. Years of preparation and reconnaissance culminated in the precise release of firepower, and the human element was as important as machinery. Infantry units advanced through the undergrowth, faces smeared with soot and snow, rifles raised. Their movements were measured, almost choreographed, exploiting the fear and confusion in the German ranks. Even in terror, the German soldiers were formidable. Their resistance slowed the advance, forcing Americans to adapt in real time. The human dimension, the interplay of courage, fear, and instinct, defined every second of the engagement. The forest's dense undergrowth and uneven terrain dictated every tactical decision. German commanders relied on fixed defensive positions, machine gun nests, and trench networks. They expected a frontal attack or a slow probing maneuver, both of which could be countered with concentrated fire. They did not anticipate a sudden, multi-pronged assault amplified by rockets that obliterated both cover and morale. American tactics exploited these assumptions with brutal efficiency. Rocket barrages struck simultaneously at multiple points, targeting not only soldiers but the very geography that protected them. Fires and explosions created smokescreens, limiting visibility and forcing defenders into exposed positions. Infantry units followed in carefully timed waves, advancing through narrow trails and exploiting disoriented pockets of resistance. Each movement built upon the previous, a cascading effect that shattered the defensive cohesion of the German forces. Surprise, speed, and synchronization became the most lethal weapons in the forest. Rockets were at the heart of the assault's effectiveness. The M8 and M16 rockets, relatively simple by modern standards, were designed for psychological as well as physical impact. Their bright trails, thunderous noise, and incendiary potential transformed the forest into a disorienting inferno. Trees shattered under concentrated fire, smoke hung in thick layers, and every explosion seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Artillery and small arms complemented the rockets, but it was the technology's unpredictability that mattered most. German soldiers, unprepared for such weaponized chaos, found themselves reacting to the forest itself rather than the attackers. The visual and auditory onslaught disrupted command structures, slowed responses, and magnified fear. Even the most experienced officers struggled to recalibrate in the face of a weapon that defied conventional expectations. Command decisions became critical as the forest erupted into chaos. German officers, accustomed to disciplined defensive structures, found themselves paralyzed by the speed and intensity of the attack. Orders that would normally be transmitted through established chains of command now lagged behind events, arriving too late or being misinterpreted amid smoke and fire. Some commanders attempted counterattacks, sending small squads to reinforce breached positions, only to encounter preemptive rocket barrages that decimated their units before they could act. On the American side, leadership was decentralized and adaptive. Small unit leaders were empowered to exploit gaps immediately, making rapid tactical decisions on the ground. Coordination between infantry and rocket artillery allowed these leaders to apply pressure precisely where German defenses were weakest. Every officer knew that hesitation could undo the carefully prepared plan. The result was a relentless advance that combined meticulous planning with real-time improvisation, a striking contrast to the rigid German command structure. The German soldiers' perception of the battlefield transformed instantly. What had once been a forest providing natural protection now appeared as a hostile entity, alive with fire, smoke, and unpredictable explosions. Rockets pierced trees, uprooted the familiar terrain, and produced a noise that drowned out orders and shouted commands. Morale plummeted as units fractured under the psychological weight of an attack that seemed everywhere at once. Fear was compounded by confusion. Soldiers could not distinguish between isolated incidents and coordinated maneuvers. The forest amplified every sound: cracking branches, falling debris, distant artillery, all creating the impression of an omnipresent threat. This psychological assault, carefully engineered by American planners, forced German troops into reactive rather than proactive behavior. Retreat, hesitation, or miscommunication could and often did prove fatal. War in the forest also exposed the moral and human costs of innovation in combat. Rockets and incendiary devices were not only tools of destruction, they were instruments of terror. The Americans, while achieving a tactical advantage, confronted the reality that the methods designed to minimize their casualties inflicted extreme fear and suffering on the enemy. From a distance, the assault might appear as a flawless military operation. Up close, however, it underscored the ethical tension inherent in mechanized, technologically advanced warfare. Efficiency often came at the price of human trauma. Soldiers on both sides were forced to reconcile duty with instinct. German troops struggled to follow orders while navigating fear and destruction. Americans faced the weight of responsibility for unleashing a force designed to overwhelm psychologically as much as physically. The forest became a stage not only for strategy and firepower, but for the raw, morally complex human experience of war. By the time the first rockets scorched the canopy, all these angles, human reaction, tactical design, technological innovation, leadership decisions, enemy psychology, and moral implications converged. The forest no longer belonged solely to the Germans. It was a crucible where planning, fear, and chaos intersected. What had been preparation became execution, and the moment of decisive action loomed. Every element set the stage for the turning point, the first real strike that would determine the battle's outcome. January 17, 1945, 20:43 hours. The first rockets lit the night sky. A streak of orange fire arced through the treetops, followed by a thunderous roar that shook the frozen ground. German sentries froze, their eyes reflecting the inferno above. In the space of seconds, the forest transformed from quiet winter darkness into a blazing, chaotic battlefield. Machine gun nests erupted under precise rocket fire. Trees splintered, sending shards of wood and snow raining down on foxholes below. German soldiers shouted, ducking into trenches or scrambling over the uneven terrain, rifles clattering against the frozen earth. Commanders attempted to issue orders, but the sound of explosions, combined with the disorienting strobe of rocket fire, rendered traditional commands nearly meaningless. American infantry moved simultaneously. Silent at first, they advanced through concealed trails, exploiting smoke and debris as cover. Small units flanked exposed German positions, cutting off retreat and isolating pockets of resistance. Engineers demolished barricades and cleared obstacles, ensuring that momentum would not be lost. Each step forward was met with scattered resistance, but the Americans had anticipated it. Every German machine gun, every sniper nest, had been accounted for in the preparatory reconnaissance. The human element reached a breaking point. German soldiers, already exhausted from months of retreat and hardship, faced fear amplified by unfamiliar weapons. Rockets screamed overhead, debris tore through defensive positions, and every shadow seemed alive with threat. Some men froze in terror, others fired blindly, expending ammunition on illusions of advancing troops. Officers attempted to coordinate counterattacks, but delays in communication meant that by the time reinforcements arrived, American units had already exploited gaps, moving swiftly through the chaos. Rockets continued to rain in carefully calculated patterns, M8 and M16 units struck simultaneously at multiple sectors, creating a cascading effect of destruction. Fires ignited across the forest floor, consuming dry undergrowth and masking movement. German positions, once thought secure, were overwhelmed not by superior numbers but by the combination of speed, precision, and sheer unpredictability. The forest itself seemed to conspire with the attackers, funneling defenders into kill zones where rocket fire, infantry, and artillery intersected. Leadership decisions became critical in real time. German commanders ordered counterattacks, but coordination failed under the combined pressure of fire and confusion. Units collided with each other in the snow, disrupting formations and leaving gaps that Americans exploited immediately. On the American side, small unit leaders adjusted to shifting conditions, redirecting forces toward weak points, ensuring that no opportunity for breakthrough was wasted. The rigid German hierarchy, once an asset, had become a liability in this fluid, violent environment. By 21:15 hours, the forest was largely in American control. Rocket fire had cleared key positions and infantry units had seized elevated ground and critical paths. German resistance had not vanished entirely, but it was fractured and isolated. Soldiers huddled in pockets, attempting to regroup, while officers tried to re-establish communication with headquarters. The psychological toll was visible: exhaustion, shock, and the dawning realization that their defensive assumptions had failed. Amid the chaos, small acts of human courage and improvisation emerged. German squads that had been cut off improvised barricades, attempting to hold positions against overwhelming odds. American soldiers, pushing forward through fire and smoke, displayed tactical ingenuity, leveraging terrain, coordinating suppressive fire, and moving with lethal precision. The forest, though deadly, became a proving ground for leadership, adaptability, and the brutal reality of modern mechanized warfare. By 21:40 hours, the first wave of the assault had achieved its primary objectives. Rocket batteries paused to reload, infantry secured flanks, and engineers cleared pathways for reinforcements. German forces, though not annihilated, were forced into retreat or surrender. The shock of the assault, the sudden blinding fire, the psychological weight, the collapse of communication, had tilted the balance irreversibly. What had begun as a calculated strike became a decisive rupture in the forest's defensive fabric. The forest, once a symbol of German confidence and defensive strength, now bore the marks of devastation. Smoldering fires, shattered trees, and disoriented troops testified to the overwhelming force unleashed in a concentrated, meticulously executed operation. The battle had entered its turning point, the moment when preparation, technology, and human determination converged to rewrite the tactical reality of this sector of the front. By 22:01 hours, the forest had become a fragmented battlefield. German defensive lines, once coherent and fortified, now existed only in scattered pockets. Smoke and fire obscured visibility, making every movement unpredictable. Rockets continued to streak overhead, each one a reminder of the sudden and overwhelming power of the assault. The Americans pressed forward, exploiting every weakness exposed by the chaos. A critical breakthrough occurred near a narrow ridge that had been a German stronghold for months. The ridge controlled access to several forest trails and had been heavily defended with machine gun nests and barricades. American engineers cleared paths under fire, while infantry units executed coordinated flanking maneuvers. German soldiers, trapped and disoriented, were either captured or forced into hasty retreats. The ridge, previously seen as impregnable, fell within 20 minutes, a decisive moment that would define the engagement. Rocket fire had not only shattered defenses, but also fractured morale. German soldiers struggled to regroup, their lines disrupted by smoke, explosions, and the unfamiliar roar of incendiary rockets. Officers attempted to rally units, but fragmented communications and the relentless pace of the American advance rendered many efforts futile. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical destruction. Fear and confusion spread faster than any order could be issued. American commanders, aware of the importance of momentum, did not pause. Fresh rocket batteries were brought forward, targeting remaining strongpoints and creating overlapping zones of fire. Infantry units advanced along cleared trails, securing strategic positions and preventing any consolidation by German defenders. The interplay of technology, planning, and adaptability created a relentless pressure that the Germans could not counter. By 22:45 hours, German resistance had largely collapsed. Small pockets of troops attempted isolated counterattacks, but these were swiftly neutralized. The forest, which had been considered a natural fortress, now bore the unmistakable signs of American dominance. Shattered trees, smoldering foxholes, and troops surrendering in stunned compliance. The decisive moment had arrived. The combination of surprise, firepower, and psychological shock had rewritten the tactical reality of the sector. Casualties were mounting, though exact numbers would take time to confirm. German reports later indicated significant losses in personnel and equipment. Ammunition dumps destroyed by rocket fire compounded the chaos, leaving remaining units ill-equipped to mount effective resistance. For the Americans, casualties were comparatively low, a testament to careful planning, superior coordination, and the effective use of both terrain and technology. As the forest quieted in patches, the aftermath of the turning point became evident. Fires burned long into the night, casting flickering light over shattered trenches and abandoned equipment. American units consolidated gains, while engineers and leaders prepared for follow-on operations. German commanders faced the sobering reality that their assumptions had failed catastrophically. A forest they believed impenetrable had been breached in under 2 hours. Amid the destruction, acts of individual bravery and tactical ingenuity stood out. German soldiers, despite exhaustion and shock, attempted to cover retreats and protect comrades. American troops moved with precision, capitalizing on every opening while maintaining coordination across multiple units. The forest, though ravaged, remained a proving ground for human skill under extreme conditions, highlighting the interplay between planning, improvisation, and the unpredictable nature of combat. By midnight, the first phase of the engagement had ended. The Americans held key positions. German forces were fragmented, and the forest was effectively under Allied control. The decisive turning point, the moment when preparation, surprise, and technology converged, had been realized. Every variable, from terrain to morale to firepower, had combined to produce a swift and overwhelming result. The forest was silent by early morning, but the calm was deceptive. Smoldering fires still curled smoke into the gray winter sky. Shattered trees, uprooted under the weight of rocket fire, created a jagged landscape, while abandoned rifles, broken helmets, and scattered equipment testified to the suddenness and intensity of the assault. German forces, once confident in their defensive positions, were in disarray. Commanders counted losses and tried to account for missing units, but the sheer chaos of the attack had fragmented their formations. Casualty reports would later confirm the scale of the engagement. German units suffered heavy losses. Several hundred men killed or wounded, with entire squads captured or dispersed. Equipment caches, ammunition supplies, and fortified positions had been destroyed or abandoned. The effectiveness of the American assault, combining rockets, artillery, and infantry, had not only neutralized physical defenses, but also inflicted psychological devastation. Survivors recounted confusion, fear, and the disorienting nature of the rocket fire, descriptions that would later appear in operational reports and personal diaries alike. American forces, by contrast, consolidated their gains with remarkable efficiency. Engineers cleared paths for reinforcements, while infantry secured captured positions and established communication lines. Commanders conducted rapid reconnaissance to identify remaining threats, and artillery units repositioned to prevent any chance of German counterattack. Casualties were comparatively low, a testament to the meticulous planning and synchronization that had allowed surprise and technological advantage to dictate the engagement. The immediate strategic consequences were clear. German defensive lines in the sector of the forest had been shattered, opening routes for further Allied advances. Control of key ridges and trails allowed the Americans to exploit gaps, threatening the integrity of broader defensive networks. For German commanders, the psychological impact was as severe as the physical one. Troops who had once trusted the forest as a natural barrier now faced the stark reality that terrain could no longer be relied upon. Confidence had been replaced by fear, hesitation, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability. Reports from the German High Command reflected alarm and frustration. Field officers noted that the loss of defensive positions in the forest was compounded by the inability to communicate effectively under the pressure of rocket fire. Orders to regroup or mount counterattacks were frequently delayed or misinterpreted, amplifying losses and reinforcing the impression of American superiority in both planning and execution. Historian analyses later identified this failure of command as a critical factor, one that transformed a tactical assault into a decisive operational advantage. Meanwhile, American reports highlighted the success of combined arms tactics and innovative use of technology. Rockets had proven not only destructive but psychologically devastating. Infantry movements synchronized with artillery and rocket fire ensured minimal exposure and maximum effect. Commanders emphasized the importance of adaptability. When terrain, weather, and enemy action created unexpected challenges, small unit initiative allowed the attack to maintain momentum. The operation became a model for forest warfare, illustrating how preparation, surprise, and rapid execution could achieve overwhelming results with limited losses. Beyond immediate military implications, the aftermath revealed deeper truths about the human cost of modern warfare. German soldiers, though trained and disciplined, had been overwhelmed by the intensity and unpredictability of the assault. Fear and confusion led to hasty retreats, miscommunication, and casualties that might have been avoided under conventional circumstances. On the American side, careful planning mitigated the human toll, yet the psychological impact of unleashing such a terrifying and destructive force was not lost on the troops themselves. Reports and personal accounts recorded a mix of triumph, tension, and somber reflection, a recognition that victory in battle often comes at a profound human price. As the first light of dawn touched the forest, the scene was one of stark contrast. The Americans in control prepared for follow-up operations. German forces, shaken and diminished, began to retreat, regroup, and reassess their defensive strategy. The forest, once a perceived stronghold for the defenders, had become a testament to the devastating effectiveness of surprise, coordination, and innovative tactics. The consequences of the assault extended beyond the immediate battlefield, influencing operational planning, troop morale, and strategic decision-making in the broader campaign. In the days following the assault, the full ramifications of the American attack became evident. German units struggled to regroup, moving through the shattered forest with diminished numbers and frayed morale. The loss of key positions, the ridge, trails, and defensive strongpoints, forced a re-evaluation of their defensive posture. Commanders recognized that the assumptions which had guided their strategies for months, confidence in terrain, reliance on static defenses, and expectation of conventional assaults, were no longer valid. The forest, once a natural fortress, had been exposed as a vulnerability. Reports from German officers reflected both frustration and disbelief. One mid-level officer later wrote that, "The forest itself seemed alive, attacking us with fire and thunder. Orders became meaningless. Our men scattered like leaves before a storm." Such accounts, echoed in multiple units' reports, emphasized the psychological shock inflicted by rockets and coordinated infantry. Even experienced soldiers accustomed to prolonged engagements described the assault as unlike anything they had previously encountered. The operation had not only destroyed positions but undermined confidence in leadership and doctrine. For the Americans, the victory confirmed the effectiveness of integrated tactics and technological innovation. Rockets, initially considered supplementary to artillery, had proven decisive in disorienting and fragmenting German defenses. Infantry units exploiting the resulting chaos demonstrated the power of coordinated, flexible operations in difficult terrain. Commanders documented the assault as a model for forest warfare, emphasizing lessons learned. Timing, synchronization, surprise, and adaptability could outweigh numerical parity or entrenched positions. This operation became a case study for future assaults in similar environments, influencing planning across other theaters. The impact on morale was profound on both sides. German troops faced a crisis of confidence. The rapid collapse of defenses in what had been considered a secure sector contributed to growing anxiety, hesitation in subsequent engagements, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability. Commanders worried not only about the immediate tactical implications, but also about the broader strategic consequences. If forests, hills, and natural barriers could no longer be trusted, How could they mount effective resistance elsewhere along the front? American forces, in contrast, experienced a surge in confidence tempered by awareness of the operation's intensity. Reports highlighted both operational success and the cost of concentrated assault. Soldiers were keenly aware that their tactics, while effective, had unleashed terror in both human and environmental terms. Yet the psychological boost from achieving rapid, decisive results reinforced a sense of competence and cohesion that would carry forward into subsequent operations. Documentation of the engagement provides invaluable insight into both sides' experiences. German military reports cataloged casualties, equipment losses, and unit disintegration, while personal diaries and letters conveyed fear, confusion, and disbelief. American operational reports detailed the coordination of rocket fire, infantry maneuvers, and engineering support, highlighting planning precision, adaptability, and the exploitation of terrain. Together, these sources create a comprehensive picture of the assault's impact: material, tactical, psychological, and historical. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the engagement influenced subsequent strategy. German commanders became increasingly cautious, reallocating reserves, reinforcing positions previously considered secure, and instituting stricter reconnaissance measures. These changes, however, often came too late to counter the effectiveness of American combined arms tactics. Meanwhile, Allied forces leveraged the lessons learned to refine operations across similar forested regions, emphasizing flexibility, coordination, and the integrated use of technology to create tactical and psychological advantages. By the end of the week, the forest bore silent witness to the transformation wrought by the attack. Burnt foliage, craters, abandoned equipment, and disrupted defensive lines testified to a brief but decisive engagement. The Americans had demonstrated the destructive potential of surprise, innovation, and coordination, while the Germans confronted the vulnerabilities inherent in rigid command, overconfidence in terrain, and underestimation of enemy capability. The consequences of this assault extended far beyond immediate casualties. It reshaped thinking, morale, and the tactical landscape for months to come. As the forest gradually quieted, the echoes of rockets and shouted commands lingered in memory and record. The engagement stood as a testament to the interplay of human courage, technological innovation, leadership, and the unforgiving reality of modern warfare. It was a moment where preparation met opportunity, and the resulting devastation would leave a mark on both the land and the soldiers who fought within it, foreshadowing further struggles yet to come. The forest, once a place of perceived security, had become a crucible of fire, smoke, and human endurance. In the span of a single night, assumptions about terrain, preparedness, and discipline had been shattered. German commanders had underestimated the reach of technology and the ingenuity of human planning. American forces had demonstrated how surprise, coordination, and adaptability could transform even the most forbidding landscape into a path of decisive action. Yet the significance of the engagement extended beyond tactics and territory. It revealed the human dimension of war, courage and fear coexisting in every soldier, split-second decisions determining survival, and the profound psychological impact of modern weaponry. Rockets, artillery, and coordinated infantry movements were not just tools. They were instruments that reshaped perception, instilling terror and disorientation alongside physical destruction. The forest itself became a participant in the battle, its trees and shadows amplifying both danger and drama. Historically, the assault underscored a shift in warfare. Static defenses, once thought reliable, were vulnerable to innovation and adaptability. The engagement foreshadowed broader changes in military doctrine, the integration of technology, the decentralization of command, and the emphasis on psychological as well as physical dominance. For the soldiers who survived, the forest would remain etched in memory, not only for the destruction witnessed but for the lessons learned about resilience, unpredictability, and the relentless demands of combat. In the quiet that followed, the flames cooled and the snow reclaimed the forest floor. But the echoes of that night endured. The assault had been swift, brutal, and decisive, leaving behind both tangible devastation and enduring insight into the nature of modern warfare. It was a moment when preparation met opportunity, When human ingenuity collided with the unforgiving reality of conflict, and when the unexpected, the sudden lighting of the forest altered the course of battle and left a lasting mark on history. In the end, the forest told a story beyond victories and losses. It spoke of the limits of expectation, the power of surprise, and the intersection of technology, leadership, and human will. A stark reminder of how war shapes both land and the men who fight upon it. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us of what it means to be human, even in the darkest of times.